Hello and welcome to the headline interview with me, Antony Baxter. My guest today is Melanie Leech, the Chief Executive of the lobby group, the British Property Federation. Melanie also led the Food and Drink Federation for 9 years. Thank you very much for coming in. We like to go back to the start. I know that you were born in London and then spent time near London. What are your early memories? What was life like growing up?
Well, thank you for inviting me onto the show. I guess I was born at St Mary's, Paddington, so I live right in the heart of London. My father was a doctor and was training at the great teaching hospitals that we have here in London. So I lived in Norbury in South London, and I remember going up to Streatham and up to Brixton for shopping, and into central London, to come and see my father at Guy's, where he was working, and being amazed by the size and the scale of it. Is I think everyone who comes to London, even as a grown-up, I mean, a lot of things when you're a child, you go back to and revisit and they're not nearly as big as you remember them. But in London's case, I think it probably is as big as I remember it to be. But I remember lights, buzz, noise, and being very happy here. But we moved down to Sussex when I was 8 or 9, so my early years in London, then to a more tranquil part of the country, I guess.
And then you went off to Oxford to study mathematics for your degree. And when you came back to the capital, one of your first jobs was back in Paddington. Interestingly, this was with the Met. Just talk us through that time.
Yes, so I spent 4 years on the beat, based at Paddington Green, which is the place where they take all the high security prisoners. So it's not nearly as glamorous as it sounds, because you spend part of your time out on the streets, policing, talking to people in a range of situations. But you also spend a lot of time being a sentry, opening the back gate and shutting it again as people come in and out, which is, as I say, probably not the image people have of policing and not as glamorous as it sounds. But it was a fantastic 4 years. I mean, great first job leaving university. You come out quite wet behind the ears, I guess, and you grow up pretty quickly and you learn a lot of things that I think have kept me in good stead throughout my career. You learn how to read people, how to deal with people in a range of situations, how to communicate with them when they're quite often under stress. So I think a huge learning experience and a fantastic 4 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would perhaps have been surprised that, having got a degree at Oxford, that you would look to the Met. But what was it about that particular work? Was it the helping people and that kind of angle that made you think this is what I want to try and do?
Yes, I think so. I think sort of public service sort of runs quite deep in my DNA, and I think that sort of underpins everything I've done, both going into the Met and since. So I think it was that. I think it was about wanting to do something where I thought I could make a difference, where people would identify me as someone who would help them. I think it was a load of those things, I think. And as well as that, I think wanting to be active. I was never particularly good, didn't reach high levels, but I was quite sporty at school and I wanted to be active and not behind a desk. Of course, I've moved on a bit since then, but even now I think, a week, if I've spent most of it sitting behind my desk and not getting out and about, seeing people, seeing things going on, I regret that. I still like to be as active as I can.
You handed your badge in around 4 years later and you went over to the civil service and lots of different roles within Whitehall. Just talk us through some of those. I know you were with the Cabinet Office in the communications team for some time, and you also worked for certain different bodies as well during that period. Just give us an overview of that time.
Yes, I've been very lucky. I mean, I've been, I suppose some people I think plan out their career to rise up particular departments or to specialise in a particular way. I just sort of saw interesting jobs and thought I'd really like to do that job, and was lucky enough several times to be able to do that. So as you say, I started out in Customs and Excise. My first job was in Customs, was working on the customs controls at each end of the Channel Tunnel when it was still being dug, so it was still a theory at that point, and we were trying to work out how you would enforce customs controls at each end. And then I did VAT policy for a while. Then went to the Cabinet Office and was very, very fortunate enough to work for now Lord Butler, then Sir Robin Butler, when he was Cabinet Secretary, which gave me a fascinating sort of overview of everything that was happening in government. And from there, wandered through arts policy, broadcasting policy, rail regulation, and went off to run the Association of Police Authorities for a while, so back to my policing roots for a while. But again, as I say, just interesting jobs that I saw and thought I'd really like to go and do that job, and was lucky enough to be able to do them.
I've read that one of your career highlights was actually being present at the time, I think it was 1993, when John Major, the Prime Minister at the time, signed went on to be the peace agreement in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
Just talk us through that moment.
Yes, well, that was when I was running Thorburn Butler's private office as Cabinet Secretary, and yes, that was the night in Downing Street. It was called the Downing Street Declaration, was signed, and we were absolutely privileged to be there, and that is one of the highlights that I'll remember all of my life, I think.
You went off to the Food and Drink Federation then. You decided to leave yet another kind of career behind and try something different. Would you say your legacy there was improving the way that food is labelled? I know that was something you campaigned quite heavily for during the 9 years that you oversaw that organisation. Is that what you've left that organisation thinking that's what I achieved?
Yes, I guess there were 2 or 3 things that I'm very proud of from my time at the Food and Drink Federation, and that would certainly be one of them. In addition, we created the first voluntary industry response to the growing awareness of environmental impact and environmental issues. So we had our 5-fold environmental ambition, where we sort of, if you like, got ahead of any suggestion that government needed to take action to force the food industry to take the measures that would improve the environmental footprint. We did it on a voluntary basis, so we set ourselves targets to reduce carbon emissions, to reduce water use, to improve our waste management and so on. And I'm really proud of that because we were the first sector that did that, and many other sectors followed the way and copied our model, so I'm really proud of that. I'm also really proud of the fact that we created the 2020 vision for growth for the industry. So we said to the government, you know, I don't think you realise what a jewel you have in the food and drink industry. We're the biggest manufacturing sector. We want to work with you and we can grow the sector. And we set out a blueprint to do that, working with government. So those would be the 3 things I guess I'm proudest of.
That's interesting, that partnership with government that you wanted to build in that organisation, because it's certainly something that you've wanted to do in the organisation you're in now. We'll talk about that in particular in a moment, but first just talk us about the work that's done by the federation you're involved in now, the British Property Federation, because you joined there at the start of the year.
Yes, so it's just come up to my first anniversary. So our role is to represent and promote the interests of anyone who has a stake in real estate in the UK. So that's everyone from developers to agents who sort of manage the relationships between occupiers and tenants, and the owners of buildings, through to lawyers, through to advisors for the sector, and then the big investors, so everyone from private equity to pension funds to banks, you know, so a whole host of myriad of different people who have an interest in real estate in the UK, and our job is to synthesise and pull together all of their different views and to try and shape that into a voice for the industry.
What was it that led you to the position of Chief Executive? Because I've read again by all accounts that you would be the first to say you don't know a huge amount about property or everything about property. Why did you feel you were the right person to lead this group?
Yes. Well, I think I have a group of fantastic members who give us hugely of their time and energy. So I have a group of experts in my members who know about the property industry, and I also have a fantastic dedicated secretariat of around about 20 people who work with me, and they know more about the detail of things than I will ever do, probably. But that's not really my job. My job is to set the strategy for the organisation, to communicate on behalf of the industry, and those are sort of, if you like, generic skills that I've honed over the years in the public sector and at the Food and Drink Federation that I could bring to this organisation too, and hopefully that's what I've done, whilst learning a lot about property along the way.
And we will come back now to that partnership, because I know there was a manifesto which was launched earlier this year, and that set out that you wanted to build a partnership with the government when it came to creating the right environments for growth, certainly in terms of commercial and residential property. How is that partnership working now that we've had a government in place for some time?
Yes, well, you're right. I mean, I've always tried to bring a sort of a constructive mindset, if you like, and a spirit of partnership to the roles that I've done. And that was something I could do coming in just before the election with relatively little background in the industry itself. What I could do was bring a sort of an insight into how the industry was perceived perhaps from the outside, and an insight into how we could try and build the kind of productive relationship with the government that would benefit the industry. So we set out the vision, as you said, for working in a long-term strategic partnership with government, and we saw that delivering, I guess, 3 things. I mean, the first is the economic impact of the sector. So we employ 1 million people. We contribute around about £100 billion to the economy every year. So we're a huge, huge economic sector, and we thought we could be part of driving recovery and growth. But beyond that, we're sort of part of the infrastructure, the fabric of the UK. You know, all of our lives in one way or another depend on buildings, whether it's where we live, we work, we take our leisure time. So we're sort of embedded in the fabric of the UK. And that in turn drives social benefits. That helps social cohesiveness, that helps to bring people together. And the places that we make will ultimately make people feel good. And we know that people feel good, then they're more productive, they're happier and so on. So we felt we were offering quite a lot into the partnership. And in return, obviously, the manifesto set out the kinds of things we thought the government could do to help us to grow as a sector.
Just looking around London, we see so many big projects underway in terms of building now compared to what we might have done, say, 5 or 6 years ago at the height of the recession. Are we back on track when it comes to the industry as a whole and building more projects and creating more homes and businesses?
Yeah, I mean, London is a fantastic global city and it's incredibly attractive to investors. So there's a huge amount of economic activity going on in London. Everywhere, every street corner you turn, there seems to be a crane, and all that is doing is refreshing the infrastructure of London and adding hugely to its attractiveness as a place to come to live, to work, to enjoy your leisure time. And our members are really proud to be at the heart of that. And what they're doing increasingly is making integrated mixed-use places where you can do all of those things in one go. You can live, you can work, you can have your leisure time. People can come together. There are open communal spaces. There are attractive green spaces. They're really creating the communities of the future, as well as fantastic buildings, iconic buildings.
Okay, we are going to take a short break, but I'll get your views on the housing crisis and what needs to be done to try and tackle that when we come back, because there's a subject which is on the minds and hearts of many people in London. Stay with us. Plenty more to come on today's headline interview with Melanie Leech. Hello, welcome back to the headline interview with me, Antony Baxter. My guest today is the Chief Executive of the British Property Federation, Melanie Leech. Before the break, we talked about the housing crisis that we face here in the capital, and I know recently you've been quite outspoken about the idea of building more properties in London that we can rent as a potential solution. Talk me through why you think that is the way forward.
Yeah. Well, what we do know is that if we're going to meet the amount of demand there is for housing, we're going to have to increase supply across all different types of housing. So, of course, people want to own their own. Many people want to own their own home, and that's entirely understood. But a lot of people want to rent, or that's going to be the right option for them for at least a period of their lives. We're going to need more affordable housing. We're going to need more social housing. We're going to need all of those different things in the mix if we're going to meet the demand that there is. And the particular opportunity we see, if you like, from our vantage point representing big investors, is that we think there's up to £30 billion available to invest in a new kind of rental offer. So this is a professional purpose-built rental offering, quite often in largish blocks, where you're seeing the kind of investors who have want a long-term return on their investment. They want an income return rather than sort of capital gain of building, selling and moving on. So people like pension funds who are trying to secure a long-term income future for their pensioners, they're really interested in getting into the housing supply game through a purpose-built build-to-rent sector. And that's not money that would go into building houses for sale. So this is genuinely new money that can come into the housing stock. So we think that's a huge opportunity and one that we've been pushing hard for government to recognise.
Yeah, I mean, the government seems to be generation buy, not generation rent. Do you think this is where perhaps the partnership is failing, and that the government is saying, actually, we don't want to increase rented space, we want to make sure people can buy?
Well, it's no surprise, I think, that the Conservatives see themselves as the party of home ownership. But we've been very encouraged in the conversations we've had with ministers that they do understand the need to increase all types of housing, increasing supply of all types of housing into the market. So we're working very hard to make sure and reinforce that message and make sure it doesn't get lost. And we've also been very encouraged by what the current mayor has done in London to recognise the role that build to rent can play and to put some measures in place that can help to stimulate that supply. So one particular measure he's taken is to make sure that when a plot of land becomes available to build on, there's a covenant put on it. So there's a restriction so that you can't build to sell the housing that's created on that land for a period of time. It has to be for rental. And we think that's a model that could spread around the country more widely, but we're certainly really, really pleased to see that in London.
I mean, we are coming up to a mayoral election. There isn't long now to go, and things will start to ramp up very quickly. Some of those candidates are suggesting they want to see a cap on rent. Do you think that would be useful when it comes to these big investors if they think, well, actually, I'm only going to be able to put it on for so much. Is that going to put people off?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's great is that I think both Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith, as the two frontrunners in the campaign, are really clear that housing is a key issue. I think Sadiq Khan talked about the mayoral election being a referendum on housing. So, it's clear that they understand what a key issue this is, and that's great, because that means you can have a conversation on how we meet the challenge. We think, as I've said already, that the key issue is supply, that actually what we need to do is do everything we can to stimulate supply and get more homes into the marketplace. So anything that sort of plays around with the demand side, which tries to sort of restrict and change, if you like, the investor proposition or the commercial proposition that faces builders, investors, is actually something that puts uncertainty into their minds. And when investors get uncertain, they tend to shy away. So actually we'd be quite nervous around the mayor, the national government, but the mayor in particular in this case, trying to intervene and manipulate the demand side of the market. We think the focus should be unerringly on supply, and we think that build to rent and getting more rental home stock into the supply in London and elsewhere is a critical part of that.
Yeah, what do you make of obviously the suggestion also of more housing association stock being sold off as part of government plans? There is this idea of the right to buy scheme being extended. Is that likely to be useful or not?
I think it'll have only probably a small impact. I think the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has done some research which suggests that around about 1 in 10 people may be able to take advantage of that offer. What I think was important in those discussions that went on about how that would be implemented was that the housing associations came together on a voluntary basis and reached a proposal and an agreement, because I think it was critical that they should protect their independence and not become sort of subject to government regulation, if you like. So them coming together on a voluntary basis and reaching an agreement with the government was actually quite an important step, I think, and a welcome step.
Do you think we're anywhere near meeting demand for new homes? I think I've read somewhere like we need 250,000 new homes in London. Are we anywhere close to that, or are we really kind of looking at this crisis to continue?
I think we're not yet close to it. I think there are things like build to rent that I've talked about that can help. But I think it'll be something that both Zach Goldsmith and Sadiq Khan and the other mayoral candidates will be thinking about very hard, because at the moment we're some way off. So we need to do everything we can to create the right conditions for supply to increase. One of the other things that might help with that, I guess, is the government's recent announcement around unlocking brownfield land that's within the green belt, so that that land becomes available, and more generally the sort of drive to unlock brownfield land and get that back into use for housing, I think, is very welcome. Yeah,
is brownfield land the focus here? Because in the manifesto, your manifesto, there's not much mention of building on green open spaces and kind of extending into the green belt. Should we be focusing on the land that we've already used to some extent first?
Yes, I mean, our view would be that there is a lot to go at in brownfield land. We should be concentrating on trying to get that land back into productive use as soon as possible. I mean, not only because it's not in productive use, but actually it's a blight on the landscape in many cases too. So you clean up an area, make it much more attractive, and you build houses that are needed.
Are there any examples in London where we're doing things really well in terms of new property developments? Battersea, for example, is that something we should be looking at? Because there's been opposition to all of these kind of major projects, and yet Battersea seems to be one that's going forward. Do you think that's the right kind of idea for what we should be doing? Yeah,
I mean, what's happening around Battersea and Nine Elms is fantastic, I think, really transforming that area. I guess one that's a little bit further along would be King's Cross, bit nearer the finish line for them. So, but again, they're both examples of what I was talking about earlier, those mixed-use schemes. So you're bringing community spaces, you're bringing housing, you're bringing leisure spaces, you're bringing workspaces, you're bringing all of those things together in what are becoming fantastic places that are drawing not only local residents, but people from further afield to come together and to enjoy the great places we're making.
And while a lot of the focus is on the residential sector, do we also need to make sure we keep an eye on business and that we offer businesses the space to grow and develop in terms of new skyscrapers potentially that are office based? Are we neglecting part of the industry?
Yes, of course it doesn't have to be skyscrapers, but you're right. I mean, most London boroughs, I think, are grappling with the conundrum of how they manage the land that's available to them, so that not only do they generate the housing that they need, but also that those people have somewhere to work nearby. So they need to integrate their planning and their vision for not only housing but for office space, for logistics space. I mean, logistics sector is thriving and growing rapidly to meet our sort of hunger for internet shopping and for just-in-time deliveries and so on. You know, all of those goods have to be stored. They have to be delivered from a warehouse, from a hub space somewhere. And those places are not only out on transport hubs, but they're also close to population centres. So boroughs are having to look very closely, I think, at how they manage all of those spaces and make sure they keep protected space for offices, for logistics, as I've said, as well as for housing. Quite a complicated process, I think.
Just going back to the mayoral election, in terms of housing alone, is it too close to call in terms of which candidate might offer the best solution to London, do you think? Or have you focused on where you think the right person might be to get that job to then take London forward in terms of housing?
Yeah, well, I mean, our focus, I think, is what are the solutions to the issue. So we will continue to promote the role of Build to Rent. We will continue to champion the mixed-use schemes that our members are undertaking. And as yet, I think we haven't seen much detail from either of the two lead candidates around what their detailed policies are for housing, but we'll work with whoever's elected next year, and we'll do that very happily, and I think we've got a lot to offer.
That's always the answer that most people give on that kind of question. Just outside of work, I just want to touch on the CBE, which I know you received last year. That must have been quite a moment. I know it was with your time with the Food and Drink Federation. However, just talk us through how you felt when you were told.
Yeah, well, actually, it was more recent than that. It was this year, and I was at Windsor Castle on Friday last week collecting my CBE. So that was a very, very proud moment. It's great. I mean, it's great to be recognised for what you've done, particularly in public service, which is really what it's for. And as ever, you know, I kind of feel it's not my CBE really. It belongs to a whole host of people who've worked with me, supported me, partnered with me. So, but it's great that that's recognised, and I was proud to lead the food and drink industry. Proud of the difference I think I made in bringing the industry together with government around some really key issues. I want to bring that to the British Property Federation too.
Yeah, I mean, we are almost out of time, but 1 year in, what's next for you in that industry?
We've got a lot of work to do next year, I think, all around the country. We've obviously got a fantastic, vibrant property sector in London, but we represent the whole of the UK, so we're out on the road in some of our core cities. We've got an office in Scotland. I've got lots to do getting out and about. And more of the same, really, promoting the great things that we're doing, working with government to try and unlock our growth potential to deliver more, and obviously working with the next mayor when they're elected.
Okay, Melanie Leech, thank you for being a headline interview today.
Thank you very much.
Stay with us here on London Live News. After the break, we'll have the latest news headlines for you.